welcome back to our podcast, Walls Podcast, a podcast where we explore how spaces shape people and how people shape spaces. And now I want to introduce myself first. My name is Akila Nislina Adamita Tatiana from Universitas Amikom Jakarta, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Chika. Hi! In this episode, we will talk about architecture and culture. How culture lives inside buildings, cities, and everyday spaces. This is not just about aesthetics, but about values, habit, and identity.
Okay, hi everyone, let me introduce myself. My name is Atika Nabila. I'm currently studying architecture at university and I'm excited about this topic because architecture is often treated as something technical or visual, while culture is treated as something abstract, right? But in reality, they are deeply connected. And architecture silently records how people live, think, and even believe. Today, we will unpack that connection slowly and critically.
Okay, now I want to explain about the background first. Architecture is often reduced to visual styles or technical performance. Many people talk about buildings as isolated objects, separate from social life. However, when we observe how people move, gather, or avoid certain spaces, we realize architecture actively shapes behavior. Cities influence how communities form and how individuals see themselves. This means architecture is not natural, it carries values. Before discussing design strategies, we need to clarify architecture as a cultural system. Okay, let's start from the basic question, Chika. When people hear the term architectural culture, they often feel confused. In your perspective, Chika, what does architectural culture actually mean?
Okay, architecture culture is the reflection of society values and tradition and way of life through book form. It's not only about style or ornament, but about how space is used and experienced. Culture determines how people gather, rest, worship, or work, and architecture becomes the physical response to those patterns. Even silence, privacy, or openness can be cultural decisions embedded in design. In that sense, every building tells a cultural story. Whether intentional or not, architecture always communicates.
Ooh, that's interesting because it suggests that architecture is never neutral. Would you say that culture shapes architecture more than architecture shapes culture?
I had to say the relationship is reciprocal. Culture shapes architecture first through climate adaptation, social hierarchy, and belief system like religion. But once built, architecture begins to shape behavior in return. The way a space is organized influences how people move, interact, and even think. Over time, this feedback loop becomes strong enough that architecture itself become a cultural educator. So it's not a one-way influence, but a continuous dialogue, like we
Talking about
yeah.
that. Okay, that really reframes architecture as something alive, not static. I like how you describe building as educators because it reminds us that space teaches us without words. It also makes architecture feel more responsible, almost moral. It's not just design, it's influence.
Yeah.
So So now let's go into the second segment. Traditional architecture is usually discussed in terms of heritage or preservation. Yet behind its forms lie long processes of adaptation and collective decision making. These buildings reflect how communities responded to climate, resources, and social structure. In modern discourse, tradition is sometimes dismissed as outdated. This creates tension between progress and continuity. Understanding this tension helps us question what identity means in architecture today. So now let's talk about traditional architecture. Many regions have strong architectural identities, like Japanese houses, Middle Eastern courtyard, or maybe Indonesian vernacular homes. Why do you think traditional architecture is so closely tied to identity?
So, traditional architecture grows slowly, right, alongside daily life. It responds to climate matters and social structure, but also to rituals and collective memory because it's repeated across generations. It's become familiar and emotional rooted. People see themselves reflected in those spaces, so architecture feels personal. That's why losing traditional buildings often feels like losing a part of identity, not just physical heritage.
But some people argue that traditional architecture limits progress. How do we balance cultural preservation with modern needs?
Mm, I think preservation doesn't mean freezing architecture in the past. It means understanding the logic behind traditional forms and translating them into contemporary solutions. For example, passive cooling, communal layouts, and human scale proportion are cultural principles that remain relevant. Modern architecture can reinterpret these values using new materials and technologies. The key is respect, not imitation.
Imitation. What stand out to me is how tradition is not about nostalgia,
Yeah.
but continuity. You are not arguing to copy the past, but to understand its intelligence. That feels very relevant today, especially when speed often replaces reflection. Tradition becomes a resource, not limitation.
Yeah.
If we compare cities across different countries, many urban skylines now look surprisingly similar. Global materials, construction system, and aesthetic dominate contemporary architecture. While this reflects technological efficiency, it also raises concern about cultural uniformity. Architecture becomes detached from local context. The situation invites us to ask whether modern architecture still represents place or merely a global system. So in this third segment, modern architecture often looks similar across different countries like glass towers, concrete boxes, or minimal interiors. Do you think that globalization is erasing architectural culture?
Globalization creates efficiency, but it also risks uniformity. When building priorities economic speed over cultural context, they become generic. However, this doesn't mean modern architecture has no culture. It often reflects global capitalism, productivity, and individualism.
Individualism.
Individualism, yes. So, That so the culture it's still there, just different culture. It's like new culture. The danger is when designers forget to ask whose culture they are representing.
It's like just different vibe. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a strong point, Kak.
Mhm.
So, can modern architecture still express local culture?
Absolutely.
So, really?
Yes, local culture can appear in spatial hierarchy, material choice, shading strategy, or even circulation patterns. You don't need traditional ornaments to express culture. Sometimes designing how people meet, rest, or share space is more culturally expressive than visual symbols. Right?
Like the layout.
Yeah. So subtlety often speak louder than decoration.
Yeah, okay.
You got it?
Yeah. I find it powerful that you still identify culture within modern uniformity.
Mm-hmm.
It shifts the question from is this cultural to which culture is dominating here.
Yeah.
That perspective helps us read buildings more critically.
Mm-hmm.
Modern architecture suddenly feels less natural. So, architecture is shaped by decisions made long before construction begins. These decisions are often controlled by powerful institutions such as governments or corporations. As a result, buildings can reflect authority and hierarchy. Some spaces invite participation while others enforce control. These spatial messages are rarely questioned by users. Understanding power in architecture helps us see buildings as social instruments, not just physical structures. Architecture is funded by institutions, governments, corporations, or elites. So, in this fourth segment, how does power influence architecture culture?
Mm, Power strongly shapes what get built and what get erased. Monumental buildings often represent authority, control, and ideology. Meanwhile, informal settlement or community space are often ignored or stigmatized. This creates a hierarchy of space that mirrors social inequality. Architecture becomes a tool, not just a shelter, but of political
Messaging.
messaging.
Does that mean architects have ethical responsibility beyond design quality?
Yes, architecture shapes life's realities, right? Ethical responsibility means questioning who's benefit from a project and who is excluded. Cultural sensitivity is not only about aesthetic but about access and dignity. Designing responsibility means listening to communities, not just clients. And architecture should empower, not dominate.
This makes architecture feel political in very real way.
Yeah.
I'm struck by how spatial decisions can reinforce inequality without anyone explicitly deciding to do so. It reminds us that silence in design can still be an active choice. Architects cannot afford to be passive. In this final segment, but last but not least, Chika, what final message would you give to listeners about architectural and culture?
Okay, so architecture is culture made visible, but also culture made permanent. What we build today shape how people live tomorrow. Designers must think beyond trends and ask deeper questions about meaning, context, and impact. Culture is not something to decorate architecture with, it is the foundation of it. When architecture understands this, architecture becomes truly cute.
Okay, Chika. Thank you so much for this thoughtful continuation.
Okay, thank you, Akila. We hope this dialogue encourage listener to see architecture not just building but as living cultural system.
Yeah. Yay. Maybe this end of this podcast, guys. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us to this extended conversation. Maybe see you in the next episode.
Okay.